A Father's Day gift that shattered our family. The box. My wife. Told me not to open. On Father's Day, my son sent me a gift box that was supposed to be a surprise. But when my wife saw it, she whispered, "Robert, don't open that." I asked why, then froze in shock when I looked closer. 10 minutes later, the police were at our door. You won't believe what was inside. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're listening in the comments. The package arrived on a warm June morning, an innocuous brown box amidst the Father's Day well-wishes and pastel-colored cards. I was on the front porch, savoring my coffee and the Sunday paper, when the delivery truck pulled up, its brakes hissing softly as it came to a stop at our curb. Strange, I thought, setting down my mug and rising from the wicker chair that had molded itself to my body over countless summer mornings, just like this one. Linda and I hadn't ordered anything recently, and our 2 adult sons, busy with their own lives and growing families, weren't exactly the types to send spontaneous gifts. The delivery man, a thin, harried-looking fellow whose uniform hung loose on his wiry frame, consulted his clipboard with a frown before spotting me on the porch. "Robert Larson," he called out, squinting against the early morning glare. "That's me," I confirmed, making my way down the porch steps and across the neatly manicured lawn, still damp with dew. The grass tickled my bare ankles above my well-worn slippers, a sensation as familiar and comforting as the smell of Linda's coffee wafting from the kitchen window. "Got a package for you," the delivery man said unnecessarily, thrusting a small square box into my hands before turning back to his truck, clearly eager to be on his way. "Sign here, please." I scrawled my name on the proffered clipboard, hardly glancing at the form attached to it. The box was surprisingly light, its cardboard surface cool and smooth beneath my fingertips. No rattling or shifting of contents, no telltale scent of Linda's favorite bath bombs or artisanal chocolates. Curious now, I turned the package over in my hands as I made my way back to the house, examining the shipping label affixed to the top. No return address, just my name and home address printed in neat, impersonal block letters. The postmark was smudged and illegible, giving no clue as to the parcel's origins. "What's that?" Linda's voice, still gravelly with sleep, greeted me as I stepped into the kitchen, letting the screen door bang shut behind me. She was standing at the counter in her faded yellow bathrobe, her graying hair pulled back in a loose bun, looking every bit as beautiful as the day I married her, some 40 years ago. "Not sure," I admitted, setting the box down next to the half-full coffee pot and the plate of toast and jam Linda had set out for me. "It doesn't say who it's from? Maybe one of the boys sent something for Father's Day?" Even as I said it, I knew how unlikely that was. Our oldest son, Michael, an up-and-coming lawyer with a young family of his own, had already sent a crisp Hallmark card with a gift certificate to my favorite steakhouse tucked inside. And then there was Aiden. But no, I pushed that thought away before it could fully form. Aiden hadn't sent so much as a text message in over a year, not since our last explosive confrontation over his gambling debts and endless demands for money. Linda's mouth tightened imperceptibly at the mention of our youngest son, but she said nothing. Instead, picking up a butter knife and starting on her own piece of toast. I could sense her unease, though, radiating off her like a mist as she methodically spread the strawberry jam, her eyes flicking to the mystery box every few seconds. Shaking off the sudden chill that had settled over the sunny kitchen, I reached for the scissors we kept in the junk drawer and carefully began to slice through the packing tape that sealed the box shut. The cardboard parted easily, revealing a plain inner box devoid of any branding or labels. It was only as I started to lift the lid that I noticed them. The small, evenly spaced holes punched into the cardboard, marching in neat rows down all 4 sides of the box. Perforations, the detached part of my brain supplied, even as my heart began to thump erratically against my ribs. Holes to let in air. Holes to let something breathe. Linda saw them at the exact same moment I did, her eyes widening with dawning comprehension and horror. The butter knife clattered to the counter, sending a glob of sticky jam splattering across the white tile as her hand flew to her mouth. "Robert," she whispered, her voice trembling like I'd never heard it tremble before, not in all our decades of marriage. "Don't open it. Those holes. I think there's something alive in there." My fingers, still gripping the lid of the box, began to shake as the full weight of Linda's words sank in. She was right, of course. Those neat little punctures, so precise and deliberate, could only mean one thing. Whatever was inside this box, it was no ordinary Father's Day gift. It was something living, something breathing, and something I was beginning to suspect with a sickening lurch of my stomach that was never meant to be a present at all. It was a message, a warning, a threat delivered with the same cruel precision as the holes that marred the cardboard surface. And suddenly, with a clarity as sharp and cold as the scissor blades still clutched in my sweating hand, I knew exactly who had sent it. My son. My troubled, reckless, vindictive boy. Aiden. Memory obligingly carried me back 3 weeks ago, to the last disgraceful scene with Aiden that had played out on the doorstep of our home. That was the day my patience finally snapped. My son had arrived with his brand-new wife, Melissa, clearly expecting yet another handout. He mumbled the same tired excuses, shifting from foot to foot. The same tell he had as a teenager, always meaning he was lying. "Let me guess," I sighed wearily, cutting him off before he could get far. "Lost it all at the casino? Forgot to pay rent? Or did you get tangled up with predatory lenders again?" Aiden's cheeks flared red with shame, but he said nothing, avoiding my gaze. Melissa, though, stepped forward with indignation sharp in her voice. "Robert, we're family!" she cried. "How can you deny help to your only son? Will you really let him suffer over a few dollars?" Anger surged inside me. A few dollars? I had worked myself to the bone as an engineer, and now survived on a modest pension. For 3 years I had covered Aiden's debts and indulgences while he refused to find steady work. "Enough," I cut in, keeping my voice from shaking with fury. "I will not support you anymore, Aiden. If you need money, earn it. I won't watch you throw your life away." Melissa's eyes narrowed, her face twisting with spite. "Then don't be surprised if you never see your grandsons again," she hissed. "It would be such a shame if Max and Jake learned their grandfather cared more about his pension than about them." The veiled threat lingered in the air. Aiden and Melissa stormed out, slamming the door so hard the glass rattled in its panes. What if this was Aiden's warped way of punishing me for cutting him off? A cruel prank? Or worse, an attempt to frighten us into giving in? I knew exactly what my son was capable of when he wanted something. Manipulation, intimidation, dragging me through guilt and shame. Linda recoiled from the box as though it might burst open. Terror widened her eyes. "Robert, call the police. Right now," she whispered, her voice shaking. I didn't argue. My fingers fumbled as I dialed 911. The dispatcher answered quickly. "Sir, under no circumstances should you open the package," she instructed. "Don't touch it. Officers are already on their way. Please move to another room if possible." I set the phone down, heart hammering. Linda and I retreated to the kitchen, putting distance between ourselves and the ominous box. It looked harmless, sitting there on the table. But my gut screamed otherwise. Minutes later, the wail of sirens grew outside. A rush of bitter disappointment surged in me, mixing with fear. My own son had driven us to this moment. 2 officers entered. One, broad-shouldered, remained at the ready, while his partner advanced cautiously toward the box, thick protective gloves on his hands. Their movements were practiced, deliberate, as if they were disarming something far more sinister than a Father's Day gift. The silence was suffocating. I heard nothing but their steady breaths and the pounding of my heart. Finally, they eased the box into a reinforced container and carried it away. Linda sagged against me, her voice breaking. "Do you think Aiden sent something dangerous?" I had no answer. Part of me longed to believe he wasn't capable of such cruelty. But another part knew better. "Let's wait and hear from the experts," I muttered, putting an arm around her shoulders. "Maybe it's just a cruel prank." But deep down, dread coiled tighter. This felt less like an end and more like the beginning, the first sign of storms yet to come. The police officers moved with practiced efficiency, their faces grim as they carefully lifted the suspicious package from our coffee table and placed it inside a reinforced containment unit. I watched them work, my heart pounding against my ribs, a cold sweat dampening the collar of my shirt. Beside me, Linda gripped my arm, her fingers digging into my skin through the fabric of my sleeve. I could feel her trembling, the same sickening dread that had coiled in my own gut now radiating from her in waves. "Sir, we're going to need you to come down to the station to make a statement," the taller of the 2 officers said, his voice carefully neutral. "Once our specialty safety unit has determined the contents of the package, we'll have more questions for you." Specialty safety unit. The words landed like a physical blow, driving the air from my lungs. I nodded mutely, not trusting myself to speak, past the tightness in my throat. Linda made a small, choked sound, her face draining of color. I wrapped an arm around her shoulders, trying to offer what little comfort I could. Even as my own mind reeled, I avoided their stares, keeping my gaze fixed straight ahead as I helped Linda into the back seat of the cruiser. She clung to my hand, her palm clammy and trembling against my own. The ride to the police station passed in a blur, my mind spinning with questions I couldn't begin to answer. What had driven Aiden to this point? Was it simply greed, a desperation for money to fund his vices? Or was there something darker at play, a deeper resentment that had festered over the years, turning love into hate? I thought back to all the times I had bailed him out, all the second chances and fresh starts I had given him, only to watch him squander them time and time again. Had I been too soft, too lenient? Had my attempts to help him only enabled his destructive behavior? The questions chased each other in dizzying circles as we pulled up to the station, the stark concrete facade looming before us like a reproach. Inside, we were ushered into a small, sparsely furnished room, where a detective in a rumpled suit waited with a notepad and a grim expression. "Mr. and Mrs. Larson," he said, motioning for us to sit. "I'm Detective Novak. I understand you've had a troubling delivery today." I nodded, my mouth dry as I tried to find the words to explain. "We think it might be from our son, Aiden. He's been difficult lately, demanding money, making threats." The detective's pen scratched across the paper as he took notes, his brow furrowed. "And you believe he may have sent you some kind of hazardous device? As retaliation for refusing his demands?" I swallowed hard, the words like shards of glass in my throat. I don't know what to believe anymore. Aiden has always been troubled, but this is beyond anything I could have imagined. Beside me, Linda let out a quiet sob, her shoulders shaking. I reached for her hand, lacing my fingers through hers, trying to anchor us both in the face of this unthinkable betrayal. Detective Novak leaned forward, his expression a mix of sympathy and determination. "We'll get to the bottom of this, Mr. Larson. Our specialty safety unit is analyzing the package as we speak. If it does contain hazardous materials, we'll trace the components, the trigger, everything. We'll find out who sent it and why." I nodded, feeling a flicker of hope amid the crushing weight of grief and anger. "Thank you, Detective. I never thought my own son would be capable of something like this." The detective's face softened, a glimmer of understanding in his eyes. "Family can be complicated, Mr. Larson. Sometimes the people we love the most are the ones who hurt us the deepest." I let out a shuddering breath, the truth of those words sinking into my bones like a chill. Aiden had always been my blind spot, my weakness. I had loved him so fiercely, so unconditionally, that I had failed to see the darkness growing inside him until it was too late. As Linda and I sat in that cold, sterile room, waiting for news of the package that had shattered our world, I felt a grim resolve settle over me. I had spent years enabling Aiden's destructive behavior, cushioning him from the consequences of his actions, but no more. If my son had truly sent us a hazardous device, if he had crossed that unthinkable line, then I would do whatever it took to ensure he faced the full weight of the law. Even if it meant turning my back on the boy I had once cradled in my arms, the child I had sworn to protect and love forever. My heart ached with the knowledge of what lay ahead, the long, painful road of legal battles and shattered relationships. But I knew, with a clarity as sharp as broken glass, that it was a road I had to walk. I squeezed Linda's hand, feeling the tremor of her pulse beneath my fingers. Together, we would weather this storm. Together, we would find a way to heal, to rebuild, to move forward, even if it meant leaving our son behind. The next morning, still shaken by the sinister gift, I sat heavily in my leather chair in the home office. I powered on the computer, bracing myself for what I knew I had to do. For 30 years, I had been Aiden's safety net, bailing him out with money I didn't have, covering debts to landlords and predatory lenders, even paying legal fees when his reckless choices caught up with him. And for what? To be repaid with a box that contained a dangerous creature inside. Enough. I logged into our online banking system and began systematically dismantling the structure that allowed Aiden's irresponsibility to thrive. First, the joint credit card I had given him back in college for emergencies. Those emergencies had multiplied and become a way of life. I clicked Remove Authorized User, Access Revoked. Next, the automatic transfers I had set up to cover his rent each month. Cancel payment. Confirmed. Then, PIN changes, subscription cancellations, shutting every door he had walked through so freely for years. Each step felt like shedding invisible chains that had weighed me down far too long. By the time I finished, I felt a strange, unfamiliar sensation. Control. For once, the next crisis would not fall on me to fix. The reaction came sooner than I expected. At exactly 8:13 a.m., my phone lit up with Aiden's name. "Dad," he said, voice quivering with panic. "What did you do?" I inhaled slowly, steadying my voice. "What I should have done years ago, son. I cut off your access to my money. No more cards, no automatic transfers, no endless loans you never repay." Silence crackled through the line. I could almost hear his fury building. "You can't do this to me. I'm your son. I have obligations. Debts. How am I supposed to live?" "Within your means," I answered calmly. "For too long, I enabled your irresponsibility. That ends now." His voice broke into a furious shout. "It's only beginning, Dad. You'll regret this. I swear. You'll regret it." The line went dead. For the first time in his life, Aiden had hung up first. I set the phone down, rubbing my temples as a pounding headache began to build. The conversation had been brutal, but necessary. Still, doubt gnawed at me. Had I gone too far? Should I have given him one more chance? He was my son, after all, my flesh and blood. But then memory rose, unbidden. A freckled little boy proudly presenting me with handmade Father's Day cards. That boy was gone, replaced by the angry man who had thought sending me a box with a dangerous snake would break me. Pain clenched my chest. Where had I failed him? Had all my sacrifices been wasted? I shook the thoughts away. No, I had done everything a father could do, and more. He had been given love, stability, education, every opportunity. His failures were no longer mine to bear. When I stepped into the living room, Linda sat on the sofa, twisting a handkerchief between her fingers. She looked up with red, swollen eyes. "What did he say?" she asked softly. I sat beside her and pulled her close. "It's done. He can't hurt us anymore. Not financially, not emotionally." Her breath hitched. "Are you sure, Robert? He's still our son. No matter how lost he is." I kissed her temple. "I'm not abandoning him, but I will no longer enable him. If Aiden wants to change his life, he must do it himself. Maybe, just maybe, this will teach him responsibility." She buried her face against my chest, shoulders trembling. I held her tight, stroking her back until the sobs subsided. For the first time in years, I felt a strange clarity. After decades of enabling, I had finally broken free of the cycle. And though pain lingered, a part of me whispered that I had taken the first step toward healing. If you're still listening, maybe you know what this feels like, torn between love and self-preservation. If so, please subscribe, not for me, but for all of us who finally found the strength to say enough. Less than an hour later, tires screeched on the driveway. Aiden and Melissa stood on our porch, their faces flushed with rage and disbelief. "You can't do this," Aiden bellowed, spit flying from his lips. "I'm your son. You have no right to cut me off." "Cut you off?" I repeated evenly, staring into his contorted face. "For 30 years, I tried to save you from yourself. Every chance, every dollar, every ounce of faith I gave you, and in return you sent me a box with a dangerous snake. What was that, Aiden? A warning? A joke?" Melissa stepped forward, a smug smile twisting her mouth. "Told you he'd figure it out," she sneered. "Your old man isn't as clueless as he looks." Their casual cruelty struck harder than any blow. They weren't even denying it. "That's enough," I said coldly. "Leave this house and never come back. No calls, no visits. If you return, I'll go to court and get a restraining order." Aiden stared at me in shock, mouth opening and closing like he couldn't comprehend my resolve. Then he spat out, "You're choosing money over your own son? Fine. Forget your grandsons. Max and Jake will grow up thinking you're a heartless man." I felt something inside me break, not from his words, but from the realization that I no longer recognized the person standing before me. "If you're willing to use your own children as weapons in this fight," I said quietly, "then perhaps it's better they don't know a grandfather under those terms." The silence that followed was deafening. Even Melissa faltered. Finally, she hissed, "You'll regret this, old man." The front door slammed. Tires screeched. They were gone. I stood in the stillness of the house, my heart heavy, yet resolute. This was not the end. I knew them too well. They would come again, angrier, more desperate. But next time, I would be ready, with a restraining order in one hand and the phone in the other. The next morning, I sat in the office of our family attorney, Margaret Summers, a woman who had handled our legal affairs for years. The weight of the past days pressed down on me as I recounted everything: the ominous Father's Day package, the years of financial abuse and manipulation, and the confrontation when Aiden and Melissa stormed into our home. Margaret listened carefully, jotting notes, her face darkening with every new detail. "Robert, what you're describing goes far beyond family conflict," she said gravely, removing her glasses and leaning back in her chair. "This is harassment and intimidation. We must act immediately to protect you and Linda." Her words landed like stones in my chest. Hearing my fears confirmed by a professional made my stomach churn. Yet deep down, I knew she was right. My son had crossed the final line. If I wanted to keep Linda and myself safe, I had to take measures I once thought unimaginable. For the next hour, Margaret and I worked meticulously to dismantle any path that would allow Aiden access to our estate. She drafted a new will, naming Linda as sole heir. Then, we established a special trust for Max and Jake, our grandchildren. "This way," Margaret explained, "your savings will be secured for their education and health care. An independent trustee will oversee it. Aiden and Melissa will have no control." Relief swept over me, though it was bittersweet. At least the boys' future would be shielded from their parents' recklessness. Then came the next step, a restraining order. Margaret compiled years of evidence, messages, threats, financial records, and above all, the gift with the dangerous snake. Using a dangerous animal to frighten elderly parents shows both planning and malicious intent, she said firmly. Courts treat such behavior with utmost seriousness. I swallowed hard, the memory of that box flashing before my eyes. It chilled me to realize that I now needed legal protection from my own son. "How long will all this take?" I asked quietly. "The new will and trust will be finalized within a week," she assured me. "As for the restraining order, I'll file it today. Once it's granted, any attempt by Aiden or Melissa to contact you will be a criminal offense. You will no longer face this alone." Her words lifted a burden I'd carried for years. Still, she added one final warning. "Document everything, Robert. Any attempt to reach you, any violation of the order, any attempt to use the grandchildren as leverage, record it all. People like Aiden rarely accept new boundaries without a fight. His reaction may be explosive. But at least this time, you'll be prepared. I left her office with mixed emotions, sorrow, anger, and a trace of relief. Images flickered in my mind. Decades earlier, standing on the porch of our new home, cradling a newborn Aiden. I had vowed to protect him from all the world's dangers. Never did I imagine that one day I would need protection from him. That evening, as Linda and I sat in the quiet of our home, I held her close. "It's done," I whispered. "The order will be in place soon. Aiden won't be able to hurt us anymore." Tears welled in her eyes, but they were tears of both grief and relief. In that moment, I realized how much had been lost, but also how much was finally safe. 2 days after meeting with Margaret, our home was filled with an unusual silence. A silence not of dread, but of release. For the first time in years, mornings began without fear of the phone ringing with a new crisis. Coffee tasted different, without the bitterness of sacrifice. Evenings passed without arguments about bills that weren't ours. But peace never lasts forever. On the third day, the phone rang. Margaret's voice was brisk, professional. "Robert, the documents were served today at 2:15 p.m. Aiden and Melissa are officially notified of the inheritance changes and the restraining order." "It's done." I thanked her, my hand trembling as I set down the receiver. Done. The word sounded both like a sentence and a liberation. Linda sat beside me quietly, her presence steady. I reached for her hand. "He can't hurt us anymore," I said, almost convincing myself. "Aiden has no power over our future now." Her body trembled as she leaned against me. "I only hope, Robert, that someday he realizes what he's lost." I shook my head gently. "I know our son. Regret isn't in his nature. He will blame us, curse us, scheme against us. Change, I doubt it." Still, as painful as it was, I knew Margaret had been right. Aiden's choices were his own. We had given him everything: love, support, opportunities. What he did with them was no longer our responsibility. I stood, pacing slowly. At least the grandchildren's future is secure. Thanks to the trust, Aiden won't be able to burn through their inheritance. That is something worth holding on to. Linda nodded through her tears. Her silence carried both sorrow and agreement. But as if the universe wanted to remind me that peace was fragile, brakes screeched outside. My chest tightened. I peeked through the curtains. It wasn't Aiden, only the postman unloading mail. Relief swept through me, though it was edged with unease. I knew my son. He would not accept humiliation quietly. I turned back to Linda. "I'll start documenting everything, every call, every attempt, every word. Knowing Aiden, this won't end here." She sat, small and fragile on the couch, shoulders slumped, her handkerchief balled in her lap. I didn't need to see her face to know the tears had returned, the tears of a mother mourning a child who still lived, yet was already lost. A lump rose in my throat, but I forced myself to stay firm. Enough tears. Enough guilt. We've paid that price already. The clock ticked steadily in the background, marking time not of dread anymore, but of resolve. It was time to accept that the son we once knew no longer existed, and that survival meant learning to live without him. The following morning dawned bright and clear. I sat in my study, papers spread before me, each document a record of the years I had sacrificed for Aiden. Bank statements, receipts, transfers, proof of more than $200,000 poured into his chaos. Now, with the restraining order in place and the trust secured for my grandchildren, I felt something I hadn't in decades: control. Still, grief clung to me. Not grief for the man who had threatened us, but for the boy he once was, the freckled child who made handmade Father's Day cards and beamed with pride when he handed them to me. That boy was gone. In his place stood a man hardened by resentment, consumed by entitlement, and willing to endanger his own parents for money. That evening, Linda and I sat quietly in the living room. The grandfather clock ticked in the corner, steady as our own breathing. She leaned against me, her eyes red but resolute. "Do you think he'll ever change?" she asked softly. I hesitated. "I don't know. Maybe one day he'll realize what he's thrown away. But we can't live waiting for that day. We gave him love, education support. The rest is his choice and his burden." She sighed, laying her head against my shoulder. "At least the boys are safe. At least their future is protected." I nodded. "That's all we can do now. Max and Jake will grow up with opportunities their father squandered. And maybe one day, they'll understand who truly stood for them. We had chosen dignity over chaos, peace over fear. And as painful as it was, sometimes the greatest act of love a parent can show is to finally let go. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching. Take care of yourselves and your loved ones.